Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to our esteemed audience joining from Japan. We are conducting this webinar live from India, where it's morning, while we have moved to afternoon in Japan. We truly appreciate you taking the time to join us today for today's session on extended producers' responsibility in Japan for containers and packaging law. I am Ipsita Roy, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator today as we dive deep into the intricacies of Japan's containers and packaging law through the lens of extended producers' responsibility. We are excited to share insights and experiences that will add tremendous value to your understanding of EPR regulations. To start with, two distinguished speakers join us today. Mr. Hussein Parpia, a professional with over 15 years of experience in environmental management and sustainability. Mr. Parpia is an ISO 14001 EMS lead auditor, ISO 14064 GHG lead verifier, and a certified professional in carbon footprint by the Confederation of Indian Industries. His vast expertise will provide key insights into today's topic. Our second speaker, Mr. Sujain Jain, a chartered accountant from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, and equivalent to a US CPA, comes with over 6 years of experience. Mr. Jain currently leads our EPR and ESG division and has successfully managed several projects in Japan. His deep understanding of Japan's regulatory landscape will be invaluable to our discussion. Now, let us take a look at what we have lined up for you. Overview of EPR laws for packaging and container in Japan. A case study that illustrates how we helped a global FMCG giant's Japanese entity to compute packaging footprint in 50% lesser time. A2G's automated packaging footprint calculator, a tool designed to streamline EPR compliances. Let's begin now. I now invite Ms. Sweta Sankar to present the agenda in more detail.
Good morning, everyone. 皆さん、おはようございます。または、こんにちは。本日は日本における包装及びリサイクル法に関する重要なウェビナーにご参加いただきありがとうございます。最初に日本の包装に関する拡大生産者責任 EPR を規制する4つの主要な法律の概要を紹介し、その後、容器包装リサイクル法の発展についてお話しします。日本における拡大生産者責任 EPR の概要を理解することは、その後のトピックの基礎となるため非常に重要です。また、この記載の対象となる廃棄物の種類を詳しく説明し、どの品目がこの法律の対象となり、どの品目が対象外となるかを明らかにします。さらに、排出量の目安やリサイクルの実施スケジュールについても説明します。コンプライアンス容器や包装に記載される識別マークについてお話しし、遵守しない場合に企業が直面する可能性のある罰則についても取り上げます。料金の計算方法を理解することも不可欠であり、リサイクルプロセス自体、さらにはリサイクル単価についても説明します。これらの概念を具体的に説明するために、業界の成功事例を示す関連ケーススタディを共有します。さらに、コンプライアンスを簡素化し、追跡を強化するために設計された自動フットプリント計算ダッシュボードもご紹介します。最後に、この分野における A2G の影響について強調し、私たちの会社 AA ガーグ&Co A2G についても簡単に紹介いたします。このセッションが皆様にとって有益な知識と実践的な洞察を提供できることを願っています。それでは始めましょう。
Thank you, Ms. Sankar, for laying out the agenda so clearly. Let's move on to our first speaker for today, Mr. Hussein Parpia.
Thank you, Ipsita. Let's start the session by taking a closer look at the 4 key laws that are relevant for packaging waste management in Japan. These laws are the foundation for Japan's EPR framework. First, we have the Containers and Packaging Recycling Law of 1995. This law is the cornerstone of EPR in Japan and was introduced to reduce the amount of waste generated from containers and packaging. It mandates that businesses recycle packaging materials like plastic, paper, metal, and glass. It emphasizes the shared responsibility between consumers, municipalities, and businesses to reduce waste and promote recycling. Second, we have the Basic Act for establishing a sound material society of year 2000. This act broadens by encouraging a society that minimizes waste through the efficient use of materials. It defines roles for various stakeholders, including the state, local governments, businesses, and citizens. Its goal is to promote a circular economy by pushing for resource efficiency and recycling. Third, we have the Law for the Promotion of Effective Utilization of Resources of year 2001. This law focuses on maximizing resource efficiency by promoting the reuse and encouraging businesses to adopt sustainable products designs. It also supports the recycling of products to minimize the generation of industrial waste. This law ensures that businesses are not only responsible for recycling, but also for reducing the environmental impact during the entire product life cycle. Fourth, we have the Plastic Resource Circulation Act of the year 2000, the most recent addition to Japan's EPR regulations. This act emphasizes the 3R plus renewable approach, which is reduce, reuse, recycle, and renewable products and materials. It targets the entire life cycle of plastics from design to disposal and aims to increase circularity by promoting innovation in the use of plastic materials. This act involves all the stakeholders in addressing plastic waste, with an emphasis on reducing single-use plastics and enhancing recycling efforts. Next slide, please. In the previous slide, we briefly looked at the 4 laws in the packaging regulatory landscape. Now, let's dive deeper into the Containers and Packaging Recycling Law of 1995, which is the cornerstone of EPR in Japan. Next slide, please. Let's look at the evolution of the Containers and Packaging Recycling Law. Some of the key highlights since its foundation, introduction in 1995 being, first, in 1996, the Japan Containers and Packaging Recycling Association, JCPRA, was established to oversee recycling. In 1997, full implementation began, focusing on recycling glass and PET bottles. In 2000, the law expanded to cover paper and plastic containers, bringing all major businesses into compliance. From 2010 onwards, JCPRA became a public interest foundation and had new tender processes for recycling. Next slide, please. In this slide, we will understand the obligated entities for EPR. The Japanese EPR system primarily focuses on medium and large scale businesses. These companies are classified as specified business entities, which are obligated to recycle packaging materials. Let's break this down further. Specified business entities can be defined as businesses that either manufacture, use, import, or sell products in containers and packaging. If they operate in sectors like manufacturing, retail, wholesale, or use of packaging for their products, they fall under the EPR system. Entities in this category are responsible for ensuring the recycling of packaging they use and produce. It's also important to note that there are exemptions for small businesses. Small businesses, which typically generate lower volumes of packaging, are exempt from these regulations. The specific criteria for exemption include manufacturing businesses with annual sales of less than Japanese yen 240 million or 20 or fewer employees. Within the retail and wholesale businesses with sale under 70 million Japanese yen or 5 or fewer employees. Next slide, please. Now, let's look at the other regulatory requirements. It is important to note, in addition to the recycling obligations, businesses must initiate the application process for recycling contract with JCPRA, calculate the recycling obligation quantities, and choose appropriate payment methods. Apart from this, records of recycling activities must be kept for 5 years, and the entire process from application to reporting must be followed diligently to avoid penalties. Next slide, please. In this slide, we have a general categorization of waste. As you can see, industrial waste includes materials generated from business activities, and special controlled waste, which include hazardous materials like toxic, explosive, or infectious substances. Alternatively, we have domestic waste, which include household waste and business-related waste not classified as industrial waste. Next slide, please. As you can see in this slide, within garbage, household waste, which is waste generated from households, is highlighted. Containers and packaging, which result in household garbage, is the focus of the EPR framework. Next slide, please. Now let's try to understand what is obligated packaging. But before we do that, let's understand the difference between containers and packaging. Container is defined in the Act as an item into which goods are placed, whereas packaging is an item in which goods are wrapped. As you can see in the image on the right, within the 4 broad material categories, which is plastic, glass, paper, and metal, there are 8 types of containers and packaging materials. For the first 4 being PET, bottle, plastic container and packaging, glass bottle, and paper container and packaging, the obligation is to both report and recycle. For the remaining materials being paper packs, cardboard, aluminum cans, and steel cans, while reporting is obligated, recycling is not mandated. Next slide, please. Further to the previous slide, in this slide we have a detailed breakup of items subjected and exempted from the law. For glass bottles, PET bottles, paper containers and packaging, and plastic containers and packaging. Over to you, Ipsita.
Thank you, Mr. Parpia, for your insightful presentation. Next, we have our second speaker, Mr. Sujain Jain.
Thank you, Ipsita. Good morning to all our viewers from India and good afternoon to viewers from Japan. First of all, I would like to thank you all for taking out time to join today's webinar. I understand my Indian peers would be, kicking off your day. So without taking much of your time, I would take this forward. So as Hussein has explained what is obligated under the EPR for Japan, I will explain you the methods for obligation fulfillment, its reporting, and the fees calculation. Firstly, we go through the methods on how the obligation can be fulfilled. So basically, there are 3 methods under the Japanese EPR law. First is a self-collection route. Second is through a designated organization. And third is through a own recycling routes. In the first self-collection routes, the business entity will itself collect the waste which is being generated from the household through their retail stores and reduce that from their obligation. Then I will come to the third obligation, which is the own recycling route. In this case, the business entity will directly engage with the recycler, conduct the collection, and then fulfill its obligation. In the option 1 and option 3, both of these options, the approval of the designated and the competent ministry is required, without which you cannot do that. Second, then there is this second option, which is through the designated organization route, that is currently through JCPRA. In this case, what happens is all the business entities are required to report their packaging footprint to the JCPRA, and accordingly, the fees is determined. On the other side, the recyclers are also required to apply for the contract through JCPRA, wherein they will be giving their recycling schedule, the recycling fees which they will be charging, and accordingly JCPRA coordinates this whole recycling with the recycler and the obligation are fulfilled. So if you are taking the designated recycling organization route, your obligation is reporting and paying up of the fees. Rest all is taken care by JCPRA. Option number 2 is the most preferred option in the Japanese market. Next slide, please. Now that we have understood the methods for fulfilling the EPR obligation, now we'll understand the reporting process. So the reporting cycle is annually. The reporting is to be done for the period 1st July to 30th June of the next same year. The financial year is 1st July to 30th June. The report is to be filed by 9th of February of the next financial year. So for example, if the sales or the consumption is made from 1st July 2023 to 30th June 2024, the reporting is to be done by 9th February 2025. Additionally, once your report is submitted by 9th February, you still have a 1 week of period wherein you can revise the data if you feel you have made any error. In the flowchart below, it provides a procedure wherein you have to log in on the JCPRA website and provide the data in the required format. Next slide, please. Now, calculation of estimated output. So as Hussain explained, the packaging is classified into container and packaging. Container is something into which the goods are placed, and packaging is something into which the goods are wrapped. The term container and packaging will only include those things which become unnecessary when the said good have been consumed and the goods have been removed from this packaging and containers. So for example, if there is a shampoo bottle, once the whole shampoo bottle, the shampoo from the bottle is consumed, the bottle becomes unnecessary for the environment and that would be obligated. Secondly, the goods consumed for business activity will not be, the obligation of the brand owner, basically, if you talk in Indian terms, or the specified business entity. So for example, if I am selling a shampoo bottle, one shampoo bottle goes to a consumer, which is eventually used by the consumer. Second is a B2B pack, which is a 5-liter pack, which is going to a hotel. In that case, the shampoo bottle, the specified business entity will not have to take the liability for that B2B shampoo bottle. Further, the calculation or the formula for calculation of the estimated amount of output as reported on the portal would be the amount of specified containers and packaging used or manufactured during the previous year. That is your footprint, less any self-collection which you have done, less any goods which you have sold as B2B businesses. Next slide, please. So now we come to the calculation of recycling fees. So the recycling fees is basically based on 3 pillars. One is the footprint, second is the calculation coefficient, and third is the recycling fees. While I have covered the footprint or the estimated amount of output in the previous slide, these coefficients are basically released by the Japanese authorities through surveys which are done wherein the business entities are required to submit the data of their sales and the waste generated. The recycling cost is calculated or provided by the JCPRA based on the quotations received from the respective recyclers. So the recycling cost will be uniform across all the obligated items. So for example, for glass bottles, there are 3 categories: colorless, colorful bottle, and amber bottle. So the rate for recycling for each type of this bottle is different. There is a separate rate for PET bottles. There is a separate rate for plastic container and plastic wrapping. There is a separate rate for paper container and paper wrapping. Then there is a coefficient. Coefficient is basically calculated based. So for example, if I am introducing 1 ton of waste, 1 ton of packaging, how much is actually getting wasted? Through that, the coefficient is determined through a lot of surveys which are done through the business entities, and this is released for the calculation each year. So the recycling cost and the coefficients are released every year to enable the business entities to provide the calculation. Now, there are 2 methods of calculation. One is the ordinary method and one is the simplified method. In the ordinary method, the businesses are given the option to remove or deduct the B2B business output. But while the JCPRA or the regulators acknowledge that a calculation of the B2B output will not be practical in each and every case. So in that case, they have given an option of simplified calculation, wherein the estimated amount of output will not be reduced by the quantum of the B2B sales. Further, once the fees is determined, the business entities have the option to pay the fees in installment depending on their recycling, the total fees which they are obligated to pay. So for example, if the total fees which they are obligated to pay is only 1,000 yen, 100,000 yen, in that case, they will have to pay the fees by July 25. If their fees falls between 100K to 30 million yen, in that case, they will have two options. One is to pay all in one installment in July 2025 or in 3 installments starting from July 2025 with 50%. Then in October it would be 25% and January 2026 it would be 25%. The same way for if the recycling fees is more than 30 million yen, in that case the business entities will have the option to pay either in 2 installments. First, it would be April 2024, 2025, 50%, July 2025, 50%. Next slide, please. So now, just to highlight what is different in ordinary calculation and simplified calculation. So for example, if my consumer sales or my total sales is 100 metric tons and my B2B sales is 10 metric tons. So in terms of ordinary calculation, my output would be 90 metric tons. Further, the coefficient provided for ordinary calculation, let's assume is 0.15 in case of ordinary. In case of the simplified calculation, this coefficient would be reduced. But my estimated amount of output would be the total output and not the reduction benefit of that 10 metric tons which is sold to the business will not be given. Eventually, the recycling fees would be more or less the same in both the cases. But since this in specified business calculation, the business entity will not have the B2B calculation, hence the arbitrage could not be determined. Next slide, please. So this is the coefficient which is released on the JCPRA website every year for calculation. So in terms of the classification, each product is required or each container is required to be classified into the business classification which are given. So for example, if you are into food manufacturing business, the coefficient would be different. If you are a soft drink, tea, coffee manufacturing business, the coefficient would be different. If you're an alcoholic beverage manufacturing company, the coefficient will be different, and likewise. Further, as I previously mentioned, the coefficient will also differ from material to material. So for example, glass bottle will have 3 categories. One is colorless, one is amber, and one is other colors. PET bottle will have a different coefficient, plastic packaging will have a different coefficient, and paper packaging will have a different coefficient. For wrapping, the coefficient remains the same across plastic and paper packaging. Secondly, under each category, so for example, if you see paper packaging, there are again 2 classifications. One is use and one is manufacture. So use would be for the business entities who are introducing the household waste into the market, and manufacture would be for the business entities who are into the business of manufacturing plastic packaging or paper packaging or respective packaging. But in case if you are an importer, wherein you are importing the plastic packaging or any sort of packaging into Japan and then introducing it outside in the Japanese market, then you are required to pay both use and manufacture coefficient recycling fees. So for example, if I'm importing ice creams from outside Japan and selling the same in Japan, in that case, I will have to pay both use and manufacturing coefficient fees. Next slide. So these are the coefficient for simplified calculation. So if you see the comparison between these two, these coefficients are either same or at a reduced quantum than the ordinary calculation. The reason I have explained you in the previous slide. Next slide, please. So here is some sort of analytics on how the coefficient and the recycling fees affects the calculation. So for example, if you are into the business of selling home care products and second product is a hair care product. In that case, if you are selling any plastic packaging, the coefficient value for both the packaging would be different. Hence, if you see in the first example, the recycling fees would be 35,000 in first case and 37,500 approximately in the second case. If your sourcing site is different, so for example, if the category is same, the type of product packaging is same, but one product is sourced through Japan locally and one is imported. In that case, if the locally sourced product or packaging, the recycling fees would be 35,100. But for the imported packaging, the recycling fees would be 38,296. Again, the recycling fees will differ based on the material. So for example, for a plastic packaging, the recycling fees would be 35,107, and for the paper packaging, it would be approximately 677 yen. For the same category of packaging, same business classification and the same volume. Next slide, please. So now that we have understood the how the obligation is to be fulfilled and what is the calculation which is required to be done, let's come to some to understand what are the identification mark or marking labeling required on the products in Japan, sold in Japan. Next slide, please. So these are the labels which are required to be put on the packaging. So for example, there is a separate logo for PET bottle, steel cans, aluminum cans, paper containers and packaging, plastic containers and packaging, multiple packaging. In case of composite packaging, wherein there are multiple components or multi-layer multi-layer packaging, in that case, there is a separate logo which is to be put. Plain container and wrapping, there is a separate logo. There are logos for paper packs and corrugated carton board. Now let's understand the penalties for non-compliance. So firstly, when there is a failure to fulfill the recycling obligation, the penalty could be up to 1 million yen. If there is a failure to adequately promote waste reduction, then the penalty could be up to 500,000 yen. When the records are not kept or the records contain false information or the records are not retained, in such case, the penalty would be 200,000 yen. When upon the request of the competent ministry for a business, the report is not provided or the report contains false information, false statements, in that case also the penalty is up to 200 yen. Again, when the entity refuses any inspection to be done by the competent minister or obstructs the inspection, in that case also the penalty is up to 200,000 yen. While I understand you guys might have this question that the penalty is quite low, but in the Japanese market, the impact of reputational loss is more than the financial impact. Further, in case there is any lapse in the identification marks which I had shown you earlier, all the marking and labeling requirements is not being followed properly, there are penalties under the Law for Promotion of Effective Utilization of Resources Act, and also there are some exemptions to smaller enterprises meeting the criteria which is being set by the government. Next slide, please. So now I will take you through a case study wherein we have worked with a Japanese FMCG giant which had around more than 5,000 SKUs, and we had computed the recycling fees for them. Next slide, please. So overview of the client, they were a global FMCG leader with presence across continent. They connected with A2G to find us a long-term solution for their packaging footprint assessment in Japan. The challenges which they were facing were in firstly specifying the packaging type, classifying the materials, identifying the sources, whether they were Japan sourced or they were imported, and quantifying the actual footprint or the usage, what they were doing. Next slide. So now coming to the solution which we had developed for them. So the first step of the solution was to firstly understand the applicable laws and their current reporting processes. Secondly, we along with their help co-computed the current year reporting numbers. Once we understood the reporting landscape, the requirements and the procedure and the internal protocols, we created templates for them to standardize the process. Once those templates were created, we created an automation tool for them wherein through inserting those data in the template, the fees of the recycling fees and the footprint will be automatically calculated. Further, to maintain hygiene in their bomb creation or in the way of classifying or the data maintenance, we created a SOP for them. The overall activity resulted in a 50% time saving for the client. Next slide, please. So this is the screenshot of how the input of the automated data was done. So for example, the client was required to upload these templates on the portal. Once they had done that, and then we were able to get the output. So their task was basically just to upload the file, to upload the PDF file of the cost which is released by JCPRA. They don't have to even calculate those costs or convert that PDF into Excel or copy paste individually. They just have to upload the PDF and the whole calculation goes there. This had the privilege of storing previous year's data also, wherein the classifications which were used previous year were automatically captured and any changes which were required were made in the last step. Next slide, please. And this was the output which we provided to them. So basically, this output had the following items. So the overall weight, overall packaging footprint for them, their business category wise footprint, their classification. So they were given various filters for materials. If they had any multiple entities, the subsector, the brands, if they wanted to see whether from the brand angle, then they had the percentage of what is used in their packaging. So for example, if you see here, they had around 78% of plastic packaging, 3% of glass, and 18% of paper. Again, the same thing with the cost. So if you see, the cost of plastic packaging was the highest in terms of the recycling fees, since their footprint for plastic packaging was also higher. Now, on the right hand side, if you see, there was a component wise breakup. So for example, what was the highest component which is contributing to their footprint, and what are the items? So for example, if you see the bottle, there were two components, the plastic and the glass, and that constituted much of their packaging footprint. So yes, that is from my side. Over to you, Ipsita, Shweta.
Thank you, Mr. Jain, for sharing your valuable expertise. As we conclude our speaker session, I call Ms. Shweta Shankar, who would be sharing a few closing thoughts.
私たち AA ガーガンコ A to G は拡大生産者責任 EPR および環境社会ガバナンスに重点を置く経営コンサルティング会社です。私たちはアジア全域で付加価値の高い EPR と持続可能性 ESG サービスを提供することに専念し、50社を超えるフォーチュン500企業の持続可能性目標の効果的な達成を支援することで、世界にプラスになるよう貢献しています。私たちは社会に大きな影響を与えられるよう努力しています。私たちは以下の複数の領域でサービスを提供しています。まずは環境、社会、ガバナンス、ESG。組織がリスクを特定し、持続可能な成長を追求しながらリスクを軽減することです。軽減する支援です。次は循環経済。プラスチックや電子機器など様々な業界にわたる 3R、レデュース、リユース、リサイクルのアドバイザーサービスの提供です。次は拡大生産者責任 EPR。製品のライフサイクル終了後の環境影響を管理するための支援。次は企業財務及び業務運営。企業がパフォーマンスを最適化し、 リスクを軽減するための支援。最後は、技術を活用したソリューション。データ分析や自動化を通じて価値を引き出すために、技術を活用したカスタマイズソリューションの提供。A to G の使命は、お客様が目標を達成するだけでなく、社会と環境に積極的に貢献できるように支援することです。本日はご参加いただきありがとうございました。皆様と共に持続可能な未来を目指して取り組んでいくことを楽しみにしています。
Thank you, Shweta. Before we wrap up, I want to extend a sincere thank you to our wonderful speakers and to all of you in the audience for making today's online seminar a great success. We understand you might have questions, and to support you, we are offering free consultation to help strategize your company's EPR journey and address any specific queries you may have. The link to book your consultation is shared in the chat box. Once again, I thank everyone for joining us today. We look forward to staying connected.